Linux and Unix and explain the appeal of each. So let's talk about the origins of Linux and Unix. On the Linux side, we talk about the Linux kernel. That's the engine that runs Linux. It was developed by Linus Torvalds back in the early 1990s. And that kernel is developed today by the community, so literally tens of thousands of developers. And there are many, many distributions of Linux. On the Unix side, the largest manufacturers of Unix are IBM, HP, Oracle, and Apple. And of course, Apple's Mac OS X is based on Unix. As for implementations, on the Linux side, you can have desktop, server, mini or supercomputers, and it's used in very small to very large environments. So it's really a broad sort of canvas upon which Linux will operate. On the Unix side, pretty much the same thing. So desktop, server, mini, super. And the distinction here is widely used in large commercial environments. While Unix has traditionally been a large server-based platform and Linux has been a small user-focused platform, the lines have blurred. So today it's sort of different than it was, say, 10 or 15 years ago, where if you mentioned Unix, Unix was meant to be implemented in large network environments with large numbers of computers, and Linux was more of a desktop or single server solution, and that has sort of blurred a bit. As for uses, on the Linux side, we have desktop, mainframes, supercomputers, phones, tablets, and Internet of Everything devices. So that's pretty much anything from set-top boxes to connected appliances that you might have in your home, and it's very common in those types of devices. On the Unix side, again, desktop, mainframes, supercomputers, and there's a large number of Unix implementations in financial infrastructure and 24 by 365 solutions. So these are instances where you really need to have a permanently available solution with no downtime, and that's where Unix really shines. As for cost and open source, on the Linux side, it's mostly open source. There are some commercial versions available, and typically you would not pay for the software, but you would pay for the support itself. So that's important to remember. And the other important thing to remember, because it's easy to think of Linux as being free, and it's not. It's not free. You have to think about the total cost of ownership. So even though we often sort of default to thinking of Linux as a free operating system, it's really not. On the Unix side, there are some open source versions. There are commercial versions available, and typically you'll pay for license support, and you're paying for the hardware and customization. So when you buy Unix, typically you'll buy the hardware and a customized solution that comes with it, and so it's a value-added sort of approach to it. And this is a key distinction between Linux and Unix, because you are buying a commercial version with licensing and whatnot, and often you'll find that there might be special tools and capabilities with whatever version of Unix you decide to go with. As for architectures, on the Linux side, Linux can run on the Intel platform, SPARC, PowerPC, ARM microprocessors, MIPS processors, OpenRISC, and many more. So it's really covering pretty much everything out there. On the Unix side, again, the Intel platform, SPARC, PowerPC, Itanium, PA-RISC, and many, many more. So the takeaway here is that really it's available, both platforms are available on a number of different types of hardware. As for file systems, on the Linux side, you have the typical ext 2, 3, and 4 file system types, which are typical for Linux. You have the ext 2, 3, and 4, which are typical for Linux. You have the journaling file system, Riser, XFS, BTRFS. And then here we actually have some compatibility with Windows-based systems or DOS-based systems. So you have FAT, FAT32, and NTFS. On the Unix side, generally speaking, UFS, the Unix file system, is sort of the default system. It also supports the journaling. It also supports the journaling file system, GPFS, HFS, XFS, and ZFS. So a number of different file systems here, and some of them do cross over with Linux. As for command shells, on the Linux side, Bash, the born-again shell, is probably the most popular, but you'll also find the C shell, Korn, and TCSH, and many more. So there are a number of different shells available for Linux. And on the Unix side, pretty much the same thing. Bash, you're going to find C shell, Korn, and there are many, many different shells available for Unix as well. And a lot of them are built on the Bash solution or maybe C shell. So you'll find that there are a number of different options there available to you. And then as for GUIs, on the Linux side, there are various GUIs available, graphical user interfaces. So we have the K desktop environment, GNOME, XFCE, and Unity. And KDE and GNOME are pretty much the two most popular ones. You'll find them in pretty much any distribution of Linux that you get. But there are many more, so there's a number of different options there available to you. And then on the Unix side, it was based on... It was originally a command-based environment, but today we actually, work with GUIs. We're familiar. That's the metaphor that we like to use. It's easy, and it's easy to use. And the common desktop environment was developed later on for Unix, but today most current distros will support GNOME, KDE, and probably some other GUIs as well. Now, as for security and stability, on the Linux side, there have been approximately 100 viruses reported for Linux to date. And that's really important to note because you think about it, 100, if you're familiar at all with working with Windows or even the Macintosh, you'll know that 100's a drop in the bucket, that there are thousands and thousands of viruses out there today for various operating systems. So around 100, and as far as I know, I don't think any of them are really active today. So it's important to note that because really Linux is a very stable system in that respect. And the other thing, too, with software bugs tend to be fixed very quickly, and I mean within days by the online community. So that's one of the major benefits of Linux is that you can report a bug and you'll have people working on it nearly practically right away, I guess, and have those bugs fixed pretty quickly. On the Unix side, again, only about 100 viruses reported. None of them appear to be active today. The distinction between Linux and Unix is that bugs on Unix usually require patches, so you have to wait for a software patch as opposed to that sort of quick response from the online community on the Linux side. Now, the two systems combined, these are some of the benefits, the security and stability benefits. The segmentation of user domains, a very important feature of security for any computer environment. Discretionary access control, encrypted passwords, isolation of tasks in multitasking, again, a very important feature for stability. Generally, both systems are extremely secure. They have very high availability and reliability, and both systems handle high server loads extremely well and seldom require reboots. So these are some reasons why people tend to want to work with Linux or Unix. Now, here's the bottom line, and this is really important. Why should you pick one over the other? Well, because they're both very, very similar. But here's the reason that people typically choose Linux. The price, okay, remember it is often very low cost in terms of purchasing or getting the software, purchasing support, and implementation. Performance, flexibility, it's open source. That's a big thing to a lot of people, and that's the reason why it's so easy to get rapid response when you have software bugs, because the community is out there working with the source code. Security, very important, and scalability. So these are some of the reasons that people choose Linux. On the Unix side, and rather than sort of guess on this, I took a study that was done in 2011, and these are the reasons that some IT managers said that they prefer to stay with Unix. Availability, scalability, ease of maintenance, security, partitioning, and total cost of ownership. And that's really important because remember we talked about total cost of ownership with Linux. And the thing is that IT managers are out there saying that the TCO for Unix is one of the reasons they prefer to stay with it. So you really have to take a close look at both systems, understand what you're getting into, understand the distinctions, but really at the end of the day, very large solutions that require high availability and reliability, typically Unix is the one you're going to want to go with, but certainly consider Linux as well, because it's got all of those great features that you find in Unix as well, with some differences obviously that I hope I've shown you here.